Hello everyone, you know who this is, yet you have absolutely no idea. I'm going to attempt to be a voice of reason, again, at my own peril I'm certain. But there's this debate going on in the United States regarding the Confederate flag and how many people view it as a hate symbol. And that makes sense because there are a lot of people in this country who use that flag, who use that symbol to galvanize their hatred toward predominantly African Americans and religious groups as well, mainly Jews. You see a lot of the white supremacists using it. You see neo-Nazis using it. So it's not a surprise to me that people would draw those parallels. But we need to step back and think for a second about what that flag is and what that flag represents. First, we're going to look at the Confederate States of America. And we're going to consider where that name derived its roots. And that would be, and in case any of you didn't know, the Articles of Confederation, which was actually the first system of government that was proposed in this country, where we had strong state governments and a weak centralized federal government that loosely tied the states together. Now, of course, we all know that that's not the way it is today. We have a federalist system where we have a strong federal government and a weak state government. That's the way it's been since before the Civil War, since the United States Constitution was drafted, essentially. So it's important to note what led to the Civil War, because there were many people within our government, many officials within our government, and many people within our country who were still not in favor of the Federalist system and preferred to have a stronger state government, i.e., they wanted their laws to be dictated to them by the legislatures of their own state, not by legislatures on the other side of the country. Govern yourself from where you live, because no one knows more about the issues impacting a specific demographic than the people who live there, and the people who are members of that demographic. And I can understand this. And it's important to note, though, that if we lived under that system, we would not be the superpower that we are today. So, if the Civil War were to break out today, would I support the Confederacy? Or would I support the Union? In all honesty, I'd have to say, and it may annoy some people, I would be on the Union side. Simply because we are where we are today, because we are united, essentially. And that's what Abraham Lincoln wanted when he basically fought the Civil War and engaged in military conflict with the Confederate States of America after secession, was to preserve the Union. In fact, Abraham Lincoln stated on more than one occasion that if he could win the war without freeing a single slave, he would do so. So the war wasn't about slavery as much. It was a factor, but it was not the main factor. And when you consider what the Confederate flag represents, while many have warped it to meet their own agenda, that flag does not represent slavery. That flag represents individuals within our government that supported a different system of government. Individuals like Robert Lee that you see in front of you. We see this. I'm going to pause this for a second. I noticed something that I saw on Google. This is an article on military.com. The Pentagon has no plans to rename the bases honoring Confederate generals. Military has no plans to rename bases named after the enemy. I'm going to take that down now. This is interesting, and many people may not know this, but that the United States has military bases within its borders that are named after Confederate Civil War generals, Braxton Bragg being one, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. John Bell Hood, that would be Fort Hood, Texas. And it's interesting that the language they chose to use in that article was that they were named after enemy generals. Robert E. Lee refused to refer to the Yanks, as they were commonly known as at the time, or the Union, as the enemy. he referred to them as those people because he knew they were Americans too. And he wasn't particularly happy to be fighting against other Americans. It's something that weighed on him, to the point to where at his funeral he had requested neither flag to be displayed, the Confederate or the Stars and Stripes. So that's important to note. It's also important to note that Arlington National Cemetery is on General Robert E. Lee's land. That's something that many people don't know as well. There is a lot of heritage and a lot of history that comes out of that war. And in school, when they teach you about the Civil War, they take the easiest Cliff Notes version that they can to shove down your throats, the government-sanctioned version. We all know that the side that wins writes history. That the Civil War was fought over slavery. That's the explanation that they give us. And it was not. One thing that they omit is that there were African Americans who fought for the Confederacy, because there were individuals who were smart enough, who were intelligent enough. Even though it was not legal for African Americans to be educated at that time in the Union as well, this is nationwide, they were not allowed to vote, they were not allowed to be educated. It was illegal for them to learn to read. There were slave owners who taught their slaves to read. That's something they don't teach you much about either. And that there were African Americans who fought for the side of the Confederacy in the American Civil War, because they knew what many others knew. They knew that under the current state, under the current laws, that if they were freed as slaves, were able to leave the plantations, they would not have the right to work. They would not have the right to be educated. They would not have the right to vote. So it would be a different form of slavery. They would be trading one form for another. And they knew this. And we're seeing the effects of a lot of that today, when they freed the slaves without giving them rights. Basically, they congregated in the inner cities, in the major cities. And we're seeing the effects of that still. Segregation, leading all the way up into the 60s, the 1960s, 100 years after the Civil War. We still had segregation in many areas. It's important to note, and it's important to note that a lot of the issues that we're having today are centered on ignorance. They're rooted in ignorance. Ignorance of the people in general. Ignorance of our own history. Something like this happens. Something horrible happens, like this moron, Roof, this piece of trash, decides he wants to go in and start shooting people up in a church, in an African American church. And he says that he's a white supremacist and he supports the Confederates and all this. Do we think that if that flag was removed from the equation that he wouldn't have still done that? I mean, completely ignoring the fact that the Confederate flag isn't even flying over the South Carolina Capitol. It's flying over a Civil War memorial, a Confederate Civil War memorial, which is part of South Carolina's history. Whether the people of South Carolina want to admit it or face it or not, it's part of their history. And if they want to remove the flag, that's fine. If they want to try to forget that it happened, that's fine. Take all the Confederate flags in this country and burn them. And you can go ahead and start that right after you finish burning the books. It's important for us to remember what happened and why it happened. It's important for us to remember that there was slavery. It is important for us to remember that African Americans have been treated worse than any other demographic in the history of this nation, with the exception of the Native Americans, which brings me to my next segment. because we're talking about hate symbols, aren't we? Before we do that, I want to show you this. Does anyone recognize this? I would be impressed if anyone recognizes this. This is a Confederate flag. This is the Bonnie Blue flag. Is that a hate symbol? No. You know why? Because these white supremacist organizations are ignorant themselves. They're stupid. They're morons. It's very easy to draw a correlation, a direct correlation between racism and intelligence level. They don't even know the history themselves. But let's look at the Native Americans, because we're talking about hate symbols. I'm sure there are many Native Americans who would view the stars and stripes as a hate symbol. I mean, when you consider the fact that beginning long before Andrew Jackson, leading all the way up into the 1870s and beyond, we had one of the largest genocides in the history of the world take place right on this continent at the direction of individuals and government officials serving under the stars and stripes. So, do we think that the American flag is a hate symbol? It stood for genocide at least one point in its history. And we are viewed, of course, by the rest of the world as being racist. I mean, maybe we're trying to convince ourselves as a nation that this is not a racist nation. Maybe that's what this is all about. Maybe this is about Americans trying to convince ourselves. Because it is of global opinion that ethnocentrism plays a large part in the formulation and implementation of U.S. foreign policy, considering that we have not gone to war with a white nation since World War II, and there have been a lot of wars in between. Mr. Roof did what he did because he is a homicidal maniac. If the Confederate flag wasn't there, he would have used something else, because that's what homicidal maniacs do. They engage in that type of behavior. They will always be here. They're not going anywhere. And I know that it's human nature to try to find something to blame, to find a cause, to eliminate that cause so that we can have our security back. We've fooled ourselves in this country. We've lulled ourselves into a false sense of security, into thinking that we're safe all the time when we're not. And we think that by removing things like guns, like flags, symbols, certain books, certain video games, certain movies, we think that by removing these things that we can be safe. Your safety is in your hands and no one else's. Psychopaths will always exist. They always have, and they always will. And they will always have to be dealt with, regardless of what flags exist, what movies exist, what books exist, and what symbols exist. That's all I have for you. Have a good night.
When I came back from Loang Prabang, I didn't have a thing where my balls used to hang, but I got a wooden medal and a fine harangue. Now I'm a fucking hero. Mourn your dead, land of the free. If you wanna be a hero, follow me. Mourn your dead, land of the free. If you wanna be a hero, follow me. And now the boys all envy me. I fought for Christian democracy with nothing but air where my balls used to be. Now I'm a fucking hero. Mourn your dead, land of the free. If you wanna be a hero, follow me. Mourn your dead, land of the free. If you wanna be a hero, follow me. Like 1 in 20 cannon thunder into the bloody wild blue yonder for a patriotic ballless wonder. Now I'm a fucking hero. Mourn your dead, land of the free. If you wanna be a hero, follow me. Mourn your dead, land of the free. You wanna be a hero, follow me. In Loang Prabang there is a spot where the corpses of your brothers rot, and every corpse is a patriot. Every corpse is a hero. Mourn your dead, land of the free. If you want to be a hero, follow me. Mourn your dead, land of the free. If you want to be a hero, follow me.